This is SinsightCrime, uncovering the stories that lie beneath the surface. In today's case, we delve into a haunting mystery that shocked a nation. The life and death of Alina Shakit, a promising young woman whose tragic end continues to raise disturbing questions. Let's explore what really happened. Alina Shakit was a young woman with a promising future ahead of her. At just 22 years old, she had her whole life to look forward to. Full of ambition and dreams, Alina was known for her vibrant personality and her love for living life to the fullest. She was social, outgoing, and had an infectious energy that drew people to her. Friends would describe her as someone who could always bring a smile to your face, no matter the situation. Alina was not only excited about her own future, but also deeply invested in helping those around her succeed and find happiness. However, things began to change in the weeks leading up to her death. People closest to her noticed a shift in her behavior. She began withdrawing from her friends, becoming distant and more introverted. The once bubbly young woman who enjoyed spontaneous outings and cherished every moment now seemed quiet and lost in her thoughts. Those around her couldn't understand what had happened, but one thing was clear. Something had drastically changed in her life. As days passed, Alina's behavior became more erratic. She started canceling plans and would spend long hours alone, often appearing agitated and unsettled. Her family and friends were worried but didn't know how to help. Little did they know that Alina was struggling with something far darker than anyone could have imagined. This period of isolation, distress, and confusion marked the final moments of Alina's life as tragedy was about to strike. The days leading up to Alina's death were filled with confusion and fear. The young woman who had once been the life of every party was now a shadow of herself. She stopped answering phone calls, her messages became short and infrequent, and she began spending more and more time in isolation. Those who knew her well sensed something was wrong, but Alina never opened up about the personal struggles she was facing. In conversations with her friends, she often seemed distracted, her thoughts constantly shifting. The bright future she had always dreamed of seemed to be slipping away, and those around her had no idea how to reach her. Alina's mother noticed that her daughter had been feeling increasingly anxious and paranoid. She would wake up in the middle of the night, pacing the floors and muttering to herself. It wasn't long before Alina's friends began speculating that she might be involved in a toxic relationship. They noticed she had been seeing less of her former boyfriend, but he had been trying to reach her. She had confided in a few friends that their relationship had ended badly, but the details remained unclear. Some believed it was simply a breakup, but others suspected it was something more. As Alina's behavior continued to deteriorate, people started to wonder if something had triggered a mental breakdown. Could it have been the stress of the breakup? Or was there something deeper, some secret she wasn't ready to share? Unfortunately, these questions would remain unanswered as the horrifying events of that night unfolded. On the night of her murder, Alina's life came to a brutal and tragic end. The details of that night remain shrouded in mystery, but one thing is certain: it was not a random act of violence. Police were called to the scene when neighbors reported hearing a disturbance in the early hours of the morning. When authorities arrived, they found Alina's lifeless body in her apartment. It was immediately clear that this was no accident. This was a deliberate and violent act. Alina's injuries were severe, and the crime scene left little doubt that she had fought back against her attacker. Her body was found in the middle of the living room, her hands still showing signs of struggle. The brutality of the crime shocked everyone who knew her, and the horror of her final moments left a haunting mark on all who were involved in the investigation. At first, the police were unsure whether this was a robbery gone wrong, a domestic dispute turned deadly, or something else entirely. However, as they began to examine the evidence more closely, it became clear that the motive was personal. Alina had been targeted. Her attacker knew her. But who could it be? The investigation was only just beginning, and the search for her killer would become the most important mission for law enforcement in the coming weeks. As the investigation progressed, the police began narrowing down the list of suspects. They interviewed Alina's friends, family, and anyone who might have had a motive to harm her. The first person they turned their attention to was her ex-boyfriend, who had been trying to reach her in the days leading up to her death. He was immediately questioned, but he denied any involvement in the crime. However, his behavior raised suspicion. Alina's ex had a history of volatile behavior, and there had been multiple reports of him being aggressive in their relationship. Some of Alina's friends had even described him as possessive and controlling. But could he have really killed her? The police weren't convinced, and they continued to dig deeper into his past. As they continued to interview other people in Alina's life, new leads began to emerge. Several acquaintances recalled seeing her with a man who had been a recent acquaintance. This man was known to have a troubled history, and his presence in Alina's life had raised eyebrows. Could this new man have been involved in her murder? The police followed up on this lead, and soon enough they discovered a troubling connection that seemed to link him directly to the crime scene. But despite the growing list of potential suspects, no one could definitively be tied to Alina's murder. There were no fingerprints, no clear motive, and the trail seemed to go cold. This left investigators and the public alike in a state of confusion and fear. The question on everyone's mind was, who could have done this to such a young, vibrant woman? As the investigation continued, it became clear that the crime was not just a random act of violence. The brutality of the murder suggested deep-seated anger, jealousy, or revenge. But what could have triggered such an extreme response? Was this a crime of passion, or was there something more sinister at play? Psychologists who reviewed the case suggested that the killer may have been motivated by a combination of factors. Perhaps it was Alina's rejection of a former lover, or maybe it was the result of a toxic relationship that had escalated over time. The more investigators learned about the various relationships in Alina's life, the more they realized how complex and twisted they had become. One theory that began to emerge was that the murderer might have felt betrayed or wronged by Alina, leading them to lash out in the most extreme way possible. Another possibility was that the killer had been manipulating Alina emotionally and psychologically for a long time, only for the situation to escalate tragically. But despite these theories, no one could say for sure what had led to Alina's death. The only thing that was certain was that the murderer had a deep connection to Alina, whether it was a lover, an acquaintance, or someone from her past. The psychological aspects of the case seemed to hold the key to understanding why this crime occurred, and yet it remained elusive. As news of Alina's murder spread, the public reaction was swift and intense. Social media exploded with discussions, theories, and condemnations. People across the country were horrified by the crime and wanted answers. Alina had been a symbol of youth, beauty, and promise, and her brutal murder shattered that image. The case quickly became a media sensation, with reporters and bloggers clamoring for updates. The widespread attention only intensified the pressure on law enforcement to solve the case quickly. Citizens demanded justice for Alina, and the media continued to amplify their voices. Every new detail of the investigation was scrutinized, and every suspect was examined under a microscope. Yet, despite the public's outcry, the police still had few answers. The case remained unsolved, and with each passing day, the frustration and uncertainty only grew. Alina's family, devastated by the loss, found themselves thrust into the spotlight. Interviews with her mother and father showed the heartbreak they felt as they tried to make sense of the senseless tragedy. Their pain was shared by many, and the outpouring of support from the public was both comforting and overwhelming. As of now, the investigation into Alina Shakit's murder is still ongoing. Authorities have made some progress, but the case remains unsolved. There are many unanswered questions. Who killed Alina Shakit, and why? What was the motive behind such a brutal and senseless act? These questions continue to haunt both law enforcement and the public. For now, Alina's family and friends are left to mourn her loss, while the investigation presses on. The case serves as a reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind even the most seemingly innocent relationships, and the potential consequences of unresolved psychological issues. As the search for justice continues, the memory of Alina Shakit lives on. Her life, tragically cut short, is a stark reminder of how fragile life can be, and how one moment of violence can forever change the lives of those left behind. The investigation into Alina's case is still ongoing, but one thing remains clear. The search for justice never truly ends. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Stay with us here at SinsightCrime, where every case tells a deeper truth.